Hi, and welcome to today's webinar on the topic of substance use disorder and the LGBTQ plus community. I'm going to be saying that a lot, LGBTQ plus. My name is Jacqueline Jameson, and I have been a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida for about 20 years. I am a cisgender lesbian woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. And I also happen to be 5 years clean and sober. I'd like to thank the Hanley Foundation for asking me to record this webinar today, and it's my hope that you find it educational, thought-provoking, and that it will pique your interest in such a way that you will leave with more questions than answers. You might think that sounds odd, but with this topic, it's very important that you understand its content. I've provided a reference list of links that were either cited or might be useful resources for you to pull from in the future, and that will be in the links below. Okay, so before we get started, a little housekeeping. Because this is a pre-recorded webinar and I am unable to communicate with you directly, I will be asking you to pause the video at certain points to contemplate answers to questions that I ask. There is no need to report your answers or show them to anyone, but rather for you to dig deep within yourself to explore more about your belief systems, values, cultures, religion, etc. If your organization chooses to utilize this webinar for training purposes, feel free to process and discuss your answers in small groups. However, remember to set a safe space with ground rules before getting started so that everyone in the room feels comfortable. In addition, I will be reviewing some of the more basic terminology currently used in the LGBTQ plus community. So if you are ahead of the game and already know the material being covered, please still stick around because there just might be something you miss out on that you wish you would have known, I promise. Okay, we're going to start right off with a few questions. Everyone ready? Number 1. How many of you actively know that you're currently working with LGBTQ plus clients? How many of you suspect that you may be working with clients who are LGBTQ plus identified, but they haven't come out to you yet? Now I want you to write out LGBTQ and plus and see if you can identify what each letter stands for and what it means. What's the definition? In addition, do you know what the plus stands for? So take a few minutes to pause and answer these questions. When you come back, you will be guided to a video prompt that was produced by Equinox, a performing arts company that uses words and dance to depict the LGBTQ plus community.
I consider myself an advocate and an ally. Think about the people who supported you, and if you didn't have them, what would you have done, and who would you be?
For my entire life, I've had an attraction to men and to women. People think the person who's identifying as bisexual is gay and confused, but bisexuality is its own way of being.
Coming out feels like a huge 8,000-pound burden has been lifted off your shoulders.
Drag is limitless. It allows us to challenge what society tells us we're supposed to be.
I'm not really one to be sheltered or caged.
When I put on my 4-inch platform boots and I'm femme and non-binary and someone tries to fuck with me, I just am like, don't fuck with me and here are the reasons why. And I feel that femme power.
I don't think of being gay as something that happened to me or there's a burden that I have to live with. I'd rather live the life I'm leading than the one that other people might want me to live.
I see it as a gradient. It's not black or white, it's the shade of gray. It can be a 50-50 game, but it can also be a 10-90, and that can change over time.
I don't feel any reason to hide who I am. Being intersex helped shape me into the person that I'm really proud that I've become.
My identity is my choice, and it's okay with me, and it makes me happier. So it shouldn't really affect you.
I would say there's not many things that I wouldn't do or wouldn't try.
One day, I met someone and everything kind of made sense. It felt very powerful to know that I wasn't completely alone in that feeling.
As an energy, it's strong, confident, authoritative, someone who is poised and standing tall.
When I go out and I get missed and man and girl, that shit really eats me up. Being non-binary makes me feel that challenging everything is okay. Knowing that there are other people that don't fit into the boxes, it's very empowering and inspiring.
Being attracted to a person's aura, their vibe, being attracted to who they are.
It's a movement, it's passionate, it's love, it's everything.
I don't have to hide the way I feel or the way that I want to present because of what other people will think.
No matter what, I'm always just gonna be me. And unapologetically, I'm gonna be me.
I'm all about pushing boundaries. You're going somewhere that very few people are willing to go.
I feel at peace with my body. I feel comfortable in my own skin. Things feel a lot calmer and make a lot more sense.
I remember, as a kid, I would have feelings like, I think I like guys in a way that I'm not supposed to like guys. So there's this internal battle.
When I'm on the floor, I'm completely different. You come out and just let go.
We still live in a man's world. Spelling the word differently adds to that ownness of being able to do things on my own.
No one does extravagant like we do.
I love glitter and sparkles and feathers. I love all that stuff.
You is your entire lived experience. You is something that is always becoming.
Fuck gender. I don't have a gender.
It goes against the typical him, her.
It's not different, it's just your normal.
There's such a variety of experiences.
Go out there and be whoever you want to be. Without the community, I don't know where I would be. I have a huge number of people behind me, and we all look fucking fabulous.
You might want to take notes moving forward as I decode the LGBTQ plus alphabet soup and review some of the language used in the community. Most of us are familiar with the first few letters, which are L and G, lesbian and gay. Lesbian is a female identified person whose emotional, romantic, intellectual, sexual, and or physical attraction is to another female identified person. Gay is the most commonly known term and can be used interchangeably. While this term is commonly used, it is really the true definition of a male identified person who has a romantic, physical, intellectual, sexual attraction with another male identified person. So far, so good, right? Now on to some of the more confusing terms for most folks. The B, T, and Q, and let's not forget the plus. Bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning. Let's start off with bisexual. Bisexual is a person who has, again, emotional, romantic, sexual, or intellectual physical attraction to more than one gender or sex. And it's really important for all of us to respect this identity because it's often turned into a joke, like when you're hanging out with your friends. And it's seen sometimes as a phase. Oh, they'll get over it. and even a cover for something else like lesbian or gay. Transgender persons are simply individuals whose gender identity differs. It differs from the biological sex they were assigned at birth. Earlier, you heard me identify myself as a cisgender woman, lesbian, and for a lot of people, cisgender and transgender gets a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to break it down for you. Actually, our go-to translation is typically Latin, right, when we want to look up words. So the Latin definition for trans simply means the other side of. In its simplest form, we're saying a person's assigned birth, sex, or gender identity are not in alignment, or they're incongruent. They're not on the same side. That's it. You might be wondering, why bother with the word cisgender? Why do we even have to do that? Why make it all so complicated? It primarily makes for a much more respectable and equitable conversation by giving all people a term to communicate identity. In addition, while we are familiar with the prefix trans, its sibling cis, CIS, has a rich history of being used in these sciences over the years, believe it or not. The cis prefix was not manufactured by some progressive think tank, as one might think. Its origins are much older, for example, when talking about cis term molecules in chemistry. I didn't know this until I looked it up. From chemistry to chemotherapy, cisplatin is an anti-cancer drug whose amine groups are on the same side of its platinum atom, just like cisgender, on the same side of. So when you're thinking about transgender and cisgender, it really is no more than on the same side of or on the other side of. Because our world is a complicated place, words help us make sense of it. So when introducing yourself to someone, it may go something like this. Hello, nice to meet you. My name is JJ, and I'm a cisgender female whose pronouns are she and her. What are yours? Now, depending on your audience and vulnerability, you may choose to also share your sexual orientation. For instance, I would say cisgender lesbian woman using she, her pronouns. This can make it very clear to the other person how I identify, both with gender expression and sexual orientation. And there are no questions as to how I would like to be addressed in turn. The hope is that they will also share the same information with you. Now, you may not want to do this with the cashier at Publix, but certainly it would be okay to do this with your queer-identified clients, acquaintances, and friends. All right, since we're on the topic of gender expression, let's review some of the terms. Gender nonconforming or non-binary. This is a person whose gender identity does not necessarily meet the society's expectations of male or female depicted persons. An amazing example of how a non-binary person sees themselves is if asked, are you male or female? They say, why, yes, thank you. Might seem a little bit funny, but true. They hold both the feminine and the masculine traits inside themselves. You might think that this is a new term or another way to add to the confusion on gender identity, when in fact, non-binary people in history have always been around. They have a fluid identity and can also be referred to as two-spirited. Interestingly enough, 11% of all LGBTQ+ persons identify as non-binary. Some other countries actually recognize non-binary identities, including Uruguay, Nepal, Iceland, Argentina, and Australia. In the Native American cultures, non-binary individuals were called two-spirit and played important social and spiritual roles in their communities. And this is true to this day. All right, we're going to move on to Q. Some people believe that Q stands for queer, others believe that it stands for questioning. I think you use it for whatever fits for you. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. In the gay community, I will tell you, however, most people refer to it as queer. Queer is sometimes used for persons who don't conform to normal expectations of gender or sexual orientation. An example is possibly advocates, educators, or activists in the community. This word can also be used in a derogatory way as well, a word of caution when using this term loosely in the community, just as with any of the other terms above, that it can be taken as derogatory. The plus. Let's talk about the plus. The plus after the Q signifies the additional letters not listed, the alphabet soup. The additional letters not listed are not because they aren't important, but rather because it simply gets too long to include every single letter. Some of the letters that typically follow LGBTQ are I and A. I refers to intersex, and A refers to allies. Intersex is a group of conditions in which there's a discrepancy between the external genitals and the internal genitals. The older term for this condition is hermaphrodite. We no longer use that term. An ally is typically a straight, heterosexual or heteronormative or cisgender person who supports and or accepts equal civil rights, gender equality, and LGBTQ plus social movements, challenging what they perceive as homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. So there you have it. I hope this has cleared up any confusing information that you may have had regarding the definitions of the LGBTQ plus alphabet soup. Now that we're all speaking the same language, we can review recent studies, research, and evidence that suggests the LGBTQ plus community struggles with substance use disorder at a far higher rate than heteronormative persons. This connection goes to the roots of both modern queer culture and modern drug culture. Although there are, of course, many theories as to why, one thing we do know about substance use disorder is that it can oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, stem from deep-seated trauma or abuse as a way to numb or dissociate from internal turmoil or struggles. As we talk about the whys of increased rates in the LGBTQ plus culture, we can't ignore a national survey done by GLSEN, G-L-S-E-N, regarding how stigmatized youth are in our country. According to the 2019 National School Climate Survey by GLSEN, more than half of LGBTQ plus students, more than half, said that they felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation or identity. Now remember, this is a place where kids are expected to be visible, in attendance, a minimum of 7 to 8 hours a day on a regular basis for 9 months at a time and for no less than 12 years. Let me say that again. More than half of the LGBTQ plus students said that they felt unsafe at school because of their orientation or identity. 70% of kids say that they have been verbally harassed, threatened, or called names. And because of technology, that bullying doesn't stop at school. 20 to 35% of these same youth interviewed said that they had made suicide attempts, while the national average sits somewhere between 9 and 14%. That's at best 10% more. As we turn our attention to LGBTQ plus adults, even when controlling for age and gender, we also find significantly increased rates of identity stress or substance use disorder. It's reported that approximately 1 in 8 persons ages 18 to 24 are using drugs at least one time per month in the LGBTQ plus community. So there's definitely a consistent pattern in terms of use. We still have the question why, right? Why would the LGBTQ plus person be any different from the straight cisgender person who also has significant trauma that landed them in treatment for addiction? Well, in terms of trauma, maybe nothing, right? What the community does have that separates them from others might be the culture. So let's talk about the gay bar, queer nightlife, drug abuse, and how these all intersect. The gay bar or nightclub scene has historically been a place of community. It holds such an important place in the LGBTQ+ world. These places have been a place of acceptance, liberation, and self-expression. Gay bars were actually the battleground for LGBTQ+ rights in history. In fact, this began more than 200 years ago. The bars were always underground and hidden. The first recorded instance of this was in 1810 in London. The bar was called the White Swan, and it was recorded to be rated under laws against sodomy. 25 men were arrested, 8 convicted, and 2 hanged to death. So while the gay bar is sometimes seen as a safe place where LGBTQ+ persons can exist without threat, it wasn't and isn't always the case. What this does tell us is from as far back as we have documented, the LGBTQ+ community was forced into hiding, and so when they were able to find a place to come together, it was a celebration of being. It typically included sex and later substances. This was a place where finally the community could be free to express their true identity. Unfortunately, bars are where a queer person can really be themselves outwardly in public for the first time, away from the shackles of family, work, or other places that they may find shame. So at this point, I'd like for you to again pause the webinar and take a moment to process what was just laid out in front of you. Think about any biases, thoughts, or preconceived ideas that you have about the LGBTQ+ community and its relationships with drugs, bar, and the culture. And why do you think we have a higher incidence of substance use in this community? So let's move our conversation onto some real deal open language about sex. Yes, the topic of gay sex, about sex and drugs in the gay community. It's important to note that I'm not generalizing the gay community, but the information I will share is a subset of the gay population that chooses to participate in these activities. So I'm going to talk about Chemsex, 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 short for chemical. Chemsex is defined as using certain substances immediately before or during sexual activities to facilitate, prolong, and or intensify the sexual experience, mainly by some communities of men who have sex with men. Men who have sex with men acronym is MSM, and you might see that referenced. Chemsex is a particular phenomenon within the gay community, and it includes many forms of substances, including Viagra, alcohol, mephedrone, which is a synthetic stimulant, methamphetamine, which is a powerful stimulant that affects the central nervous system and highly addictive as well, sometimes referred to as Tina, Christina, Go Fast, Glass, Ice, and more. Or one of the newer favorites, unfortunately, GHB, otherwise known as the date rape drug, gamma hydroxybutyrate, to enhance their sexual experiences. These drugs can be ingested in a number of ways. They can be taken orally, nasally, or they can be injected, which is a technique known as slamming. We're now seeing men develop a reliance on GHB. In the first instance, it's used to heighten their sexual pleasure, but then actually sex without it then becomes unfulfilling. And they may seek to have it again and again and again. Chemsex is also reportedly being used by trans and non-binary folks to break down barriers and body dysphoria. One thing we need to consider when learning this information is that we have to be careful about the way we talk about chemsex. In that there's a tendency to just slip into sort of a moral panic or concern. Another popular drug of choice for gay men, historically speaking, are poppers, causing blood vessel dilation and muscle relaxation and used for sexual enhancement. So although we didn't break down all of the drugs and substances used by the LGBTQ plus community, the overall assumption being made here today is that due to social stigmas being a part of the community, it may impact whether one becomes addicted to substances. So now to face the question of why once more, and what do we do about the higher rates of substance use disorder in the community? There are many factors that contribute to the prevalence of substance use disorder in the LGBTQ plus community, but some of the most common triggering issues that people in the queer community face include description and stigma. This can be more than just identifying as LGBTQ plus. It may mean that you are also a person of color. So in addition to stigma of being gay, now you're Latino and gay, or Black and gay, etc. Culture on top of culture, rules and barriers to coming out or being who you are with family and friends. Lack of support for LGBTQ plus people. Some LGBTQ plus persons choose to stay in the closet their entire life to avoid loss or discrimination. I have had clients that come to therapy that disclose their true identity of being transgender after 50 years in a heteronormative marriage with children. Internalized homophobia. Even though family and friends may provide support and acceptance, the individual may experience internalized homophobia. This can happen when they self-identify with anti-gay stigma, self-blaming for being bad, different, gay, that terrible thing that everyone loathes. This can lead to alcohol and drug use as a means to silence the negative thoughts about themselves. So how can we help the LGBTQ plus have better outcomes in the recovery process? Although in Palm Beach County, we have limited treatment options for specialization in LGBTQ plus substance abuse recovery, treatment centers that specialize in the needs of the queer community and who are trained in treating the underlying elements that may have caused addiction may be instrumental to the recovery process. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, addiction treatment programs that offer specialized groups for the LGBTQ plus community show far better outcomes for those clients than non-specialized programs. Current research suggests that the treatment should address unique factors in these patients' lives, such as homophobia, transphobia, familial issues, violence in the home, and social isolation. So as I wrap this up, one more thing to be aware of and consider are the potential for co-occurring mental health disorders brought on by the psychological impact of keeping one's identity or sexuality a secret, as well as the feeling of living a double life. As we've learned today, the rate of addiction and substance use disorders in the LGBTQ plus community is concerning, and there are various challenges and obstacles these individuals face on a daily basis. So if you or someone you care about is struggling with addiction and you just don't know what to do, and you don't know the resources in your area, you can call your local information hotline or you can reach out to help.org, which is a national drug abuse hotline for more information. Okay, so that's a wrap, and I'd like to thank all of you for your time today. If you'd like to watch the full video of the LGBTQ alphabet powered by Pride Equinox, please click the link below.